Last weekend, some of you all knew that we had, I'd been to Jamesport and I'd gotten tomatoes. We do that every year because we like to can all of our own tomato sauce and salsa and juice and all that sort of stuff. So we got to dinner last Sunday night, and our kitchen looked like a tomato had exploded in it. Pretty sure if like a crime scene investigation unit came on the scene, they'd be a little bit perturbed by what they saw, because it just was this crazy mess that was sitting inside of our kitchen. But we ended up with, and Emily, correct me if I'm wrong, something like 13 quarts of tomato juice, 19 quarts of sauce, and like 24 pints of salsa. So we're in good shape. I'd like to have more salsa than that, but I don't want to can any more salsa than that. So we're good for right now. But in the middle of that Sunday night, we still needed to have dinner. So we do what anyone does in that situation, which is you don't open the refrigerator because you don't want to have to clean anything up as you do that. So I went to Good Sense. I go up there and I walk in and I go to make our order, and Jack got spaghetti. He's not big enough yet to really eat sandwiches all that well or easily, not without a lot of cutting and stuff. So they've got the nice little packages there. He got spaghetti and meatballs, which of course meant that by the end of his dinner, so it looked like a tomato had exploded all over him. But, so we get up there, we get all that, and I put my order in, and Carter is up there working last Sunday night, and he was putting together Emily's sandwich, and she rarely gets anything different than the Penny Club with just a certain set of toppings on there. So I told Carter all of those things, and makes it an easy order for me to get, but it's harder for him to do because then you have to be able to get it shut. And I made a comment to him, and I said, that's a lot of stuff that she's got on her sandwich. And Carter replied, he's seen worse. It really wasn't all that many. We chatted for a moment, and he said basically it just comes down to some folks really just want to get their money's worth out of that sandwich. And that is a saying that comes out a lot of times, right? We just want to get our money's worth out of things. And we do this in lots of situations. I love this comic I found out of a newspaper back east somewhere, I think. And it just says, this is what it is. Like, someone increases the price on something. Our first response generally is, I'm going to make sure I get everything I can out of that, right? They're going to charge me $2 more. By golly, I'm going to get my money's worth out of that change. Food makes a great example of this, but sandwich shops even too. I remember when I was a student at UMKC, there was a Subway close to the block school where I spent all of my time. And I'd go down there, I'd go to grab a sandwich, and I'd walk in there, and you'd see some of these guys that were in there that they would order the vegetarian sandwich. That was the cheapest one on the menu. All it was bread and cheese and vegetables. They might even put some mayonnaise on it if they were feeling super special that day. And they do that, but they would go and they would order that, and then they'd just pile it high with all the toppings so you couldn't even get it shut. They were cheap, but by golly, they were going to get their money's worth out of this foot-long sandwich that had only lettuce and tomato and onions and all the vegetables on it. They were going to do that. And I'm not immune from this either. Follow me to a Chinese buffet sometime. You're going to see exactly how much I'm going to get out of my money when I walk in there. Doesn't matter how many plates I've had. I'm going to go that last time so I can get one last crab rangoon, some Jell-O squares, maybe some chocolate pudding, a couple of eclairs, and those little fried dough balls that look like they're the whack biscuits that someone just put out, dropped in a fryer, then rolled in sugar. I'm going to get all of those things. Whether or not I have room for that is irrelevant to the fact that I'm going to get my money's worth, right? This is what we do. It isn't just food either, because how many of us want to get that last little dab of toothpaste out of the toothpaste tube? Doesn't matter that little dab is just a few cents worth of stuff in the bottom of there. It is costing you more to get that little thing out of there than all of that toothpaste that's in there. We tell ourselves we do this kind of thing because we don't want to be wasteful. But that's only true some of the time. Most of the time we do this because we don't want to run out. We don't, it's not so much, we just don't know what's going to come next. And even if, like in our house, one of the best and worst things that Amazon ever did was they had subscriptions that you could have. So we get toothpaste tubes that show up at our house about once every 3 months, and there's several of them. So we always have plenty in the house, but I'm going to get that last little bit out of there because I don't want to run out, or if something happens, I want to make sure that in case the apocalypse comes and the world goes berserk, I still can brush my teeth, right? I just don't want to run out. Behind all of this is this perception of scarcity. That things are going to run out, that it's not going to be enough, that I've got to get my money's worth now because otherwise I might be in trouble later. And that sentiment shows itself up in lots of different ways through every part of our lives. But Jesus does something different, especially in this story out of the wedding at Cana, where we get this statement that comes towards the end of this: "You kept the good wine until now." This should begin to alter how we see the world, and this is important because this comes as a part of the first miracle that Jesus does. One of the very first messages that he begins to share amongst all the people, beyond just his disciples, is this one: "You kept the good wine until now." This begins to tell us just what it is that Jesus is here to do. Like any good story, like any story in John's gospel, there are lots of places that we can take this story of his first miracle and we can make our point. Lots of folks try to work out the interaction between Jesus and his mother. I think there have been doctoral dissertations that have been written on the interaction of Jesus and his mother in this story. There's lots of stuff, weird places you can go there. Lots of folks will go to what the wine symbolizes, what the great quality must have meant. Some folks spend time with what the servants and what the groom and what the other folks may have been thinking about all of this. And over the years, I have done all of those things in this story. But I want to go to a part of the story that gets covered a lot, but it's something that sticks in me every time I come to it. And where I get this little twinge of annoyance every time I read it, and it all comes down to timing. I get the theological point that's being made here. Jesus is the best. He is the last that will ever need to come. I get in that making the wine that Jesus, of course, is going to make the very best wine possible, because it wouldn't be much of a miracle if Jesus turns all of that water into wine and you take your first drink of it and it's all vinegar. I mean, that's not what he's going to do. He's the Son of Man. He's the Son of God. He's going to make good wine when he does this. I get all of that. But what really gets me, though, is the waste. And they point this out in the middle of the story, that most of the folks that are going to be drinking this wine aren't going to get how good it is because they have already been celebrating this wedding for a long time. They're not going to taste it. That's why you don't bring the good wine out at the beginning. It's a waste. It's a waste that you're bringing out the expensive stuff when everyone is already so drunk that they aren't going to know anything. We'll look at Jesus and say, don't you want to get your money's worth out of this? I mean, I know it only cost Jesus some water and just a little bit of time, but it's the principle of the thing. There's the other phrase that gets used a lot in the middle of this. It's the principle of the thing. The worldly principle at this point says that you got to get your money's worth, that you're throwing your money away with good wine on drunk people, that this is just not something that you should do. But the bigger principle at play is the one that is the one of scarcity. The belief that there's only ever so much good to go around. And this is why I love wine as an example of this, because they've actually done the studies and the research that say that unless you are a really very, very highly trained sommelier, just go with the cheap bottle of wine because you can't really taste the difference in it. I mean, I love the stories when they come out. I read these and they give 2 bottles of wine to folks. They say one bottle is a really expensive bottle, one bottle is very cheap. And they run the studies, and folks will say, of course, the expensive one is so much better, and they can taste all these different notes in the wine when they do this, and the cheap one is just cheap. And then they reveal it later. They say, no, we just took the same bottle of wine and poured it into 2 other bottles. But the expensive one is perceived as being scarce. It's good. There's not much of it. It's expensive. It's going to cost you more. It's going to cost you more to get it. And so we're worried about what's going to happen. We're worried about what we're going to do with all of this. Thomas Hobbes described life in this way. He said, life in the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So we went inspirational reading, go to Thomas Hobbes. This is, now technically he's talking about the state of nature here. This is before we enter civilized society, civilized nature, before we become refined. And he's saying this is what life looks like. It's nasty, brutish, and short. The problem with that is what is the state of nature and what is civilized society? That's a moving target most of the time. Because what pervades this is this sentiment that good things are scarce. And we have to do as much as we can to maximize all of the good things that we can get. So we value and therefore try to hoard the good things. So you don't leave the good wine until the end, because it's only those brutish people that are going to be having it. To bring it out at the beginning when they're actually going to taste it and they're going to enjoy it. You leave the cheap stuff for the end because there's always an abundance of that. And then Jesus comes onto the scene and he says, I'm going to serve the good wine, even when I know that most of the folks who are going to be drinking it aren't going to know. Jesus is saying, I have so much of this that I can waste it. I literally created this out of water. We've got oceans of this stuff. We're fine. We've got plenty of this. And I'm just going to do it when I want. And we look to the folks that knew who it was that made the wine. The servants knew who did this. Everyone else that was there didn't know a thing. Everyone else assumed that the groom was the one who had been holding back the good wine until the end for whatever reason. The groom probably got a lot of credit for this. You know, if I were the groom and this happened, I'd ride that for a while. You know, and I've got so much, I'm going to give you the good wine, even though I know it's going to be a waste. It's a big, extravagant, lavish thing to say or to do. You know, at some point, folks are going to figure out that's not really how that worked. But, you know, but for the folks that knew, they knew. And the last part of the passage even gives us a little bit more. Verse 11 says, this was the first miraculous sign that Jesus did in Cana of Galilee. He revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Only the disciples believed, and that was okay. Remember, Jesus has plenty of this to go around. He is doing big things. This is not just the only thing that is going to happen. And when we stop and we look back at the story, the only reason we tell the story is not because anyone remembers who the groom is. No one remembers who the bride was. No one remembers what kind of dress she was wearing that day. We are still telling the story because of what Jesus did to those great big barrels of water. We know what Jesus did. You kept the good wine until now. We live in a world that tells us that we have to take what we can get now, that we need to get our money's worth out of whatever it is that we are doing, except that our money's worth gets wildly exaggerated all the time, because as soon as I go back for, that second or that third plate of the Chinese buffet, the first time I do that, that's a novelty. The second time I do that, I have established a pattern. It's no longer extravagant at that point. Go back for the next plate after that because I've got to get that last, or I go up for the little dish of ice cream, right? Now that's extravagant. Now that is wildly out of character. I'm a firm believer in one of the reasons why we have so many problems in the hospitality sector right now, think restaurants and hotels, is because for so long we wanted to get our money's worth out of things. We wanted 5-star service off the value menu at McDonald's. I don't care how good that Big Mac is, it is never going to get a Michelin star. That's just not how that's going to run. But that was the expectations that we built up. And so we see folks, before the pandemic, we heard all sorts of stories from folks who were treated awfully by folks who were coming in to spend $2 to get something to eat, and they would treat people awfully, and then the line that would come out said, well, if you don't like it, go find someplace else to work. And then in the pandemic, what did folks do? They went and found someplace else to work. And now we're having to reevaluate our expectations of what we're going to get. Everything's having to come back into line because we've found out that our values had gotten all out of whack. our beliefs in what was good and what we could get our money out of changed. Jesus tells us we're a lot better off if we wait for it. Have some patience. We may not have the best things now, but that's okay because there is still more that is coming. And yet, Jesus also says, I'm going to be a little wasteful now. So I've got all this stuff, and I'm just going to make it out there. And I know that there are going to be folks out there that are going to waste it. I know that I'm giving all of this best wine, and there are going to be folks out there that are not going to get their money out of it, not going to get their value out of it. But that's okay. I don't care. I've got more than enough of all of this. Yes, it may be a little wasteful now, but is it really worth draining that last little dab of toothpaste out of the tube? When it's only going to take you, 2 or 3 years of getting that little dab out of the tube before you make up that $5 on the toothpaste, right? In this miracle, Jesus shows us that his intentions are much bigger than we expect. Remember, at this time, folks were expecting a king to come and to lead their armies into battle and to overtake the Romans, no matter how wildly unrealistic of an expectation that was. That would take an act of God for the folks in Jerusalem and Judah to overwhelm the Roman Empire. But that's what their expectation was. Jesus says, I already have control over all creation. Why do I want to go and do such a little thing like that? That's to try and lead an army. So he says, we're going to take the time we need for you all to really understand what is going on. And he says, I'm going to be overwhelmingly generous with what I have to give, with the grace that I have to give. And I'm going to give it to all, and it's not going to be bound by our perceptions of scarcity or our principles, and certainly not our desires not to waste anything or to get our money's worth out of it. Jesus looks even at the waste and says, this is still a part of my creation, and that's okay. And because of that, it can never be wasted. So let us live lives that are not based in scarcity, but based in the overwhelming promise that comes from Jesus Christ. Even when he tells us, you might need to wait for this a bit, but that's okay. Because even then, my abundance will be more than you can have. It will be better than what you can know. Even if you don't completely understand it now, that's okay. You will figure it out. And my grace is more than sufficient for all things around.